Hi everyone. My topic of presentation is leveraging generative AI for sustainable digital empowerment in indigenous communities. Myself, Sankalp Srivastava. I'm a PhD scholar at the Indian Institute of Management, Shillong, along with my guide and professor, Dr. Parijat Upadhyay. So, starting with the presentation, the agenda includes the introduction, the literature review, and the literature review has been segregated into three parts. One is talking about the indigenous digitalization, which we have done the literature review since 1990. Then coming to artificial intelligence, for which we have quite a bit of literature available now, and then finally coming up to generative AI, because through that we are trying to show how we can address the gap. We'll then talk about the research gaps, the research questions, our methodology, data collection, and expected contributions. So, introduction and starting with, as you mentioned, we started our review of the literature on how digitalization has helped indigenous people. So, the contribution of indigenous people, especially in various nations, is towards achieving sustainable development, and digitalization has helped it because emerging digital technologies offer the opportunities for these people to develop new ways of representing their knowledge and reclaiming the cultural heritage. In the recent years, though, the advent of generative AI, generative artificial intelligence, has opened new avenues because what how generative AI is different than AI is it can actually produce new text, new set of information based on the data, based on the models is trained upon. So while traditional AI systems primarily analyze and learn from input data, generative AI goes a step further by creating new data that is similar yet distinct. Um, our literature review, what we did is we went through reports and publications, especially like International Labour Organization, UNESCO, WWF, NITI, IO, corporate reports, etc. We focused on two journals in a specific. One was Scopus, one was Web of Science. We also looked at industry reports, and that was particularly important in our case because generative AI being very, very new, that is being more talked about in a lot of corporates. So we went through reports from Deloitte, Accenture, McKinsey, etc. We also had to take a look at government websites because when we are talking about indigenous population, we do need to look at government websites and government reports to be able to gather the data required. And at the end, we also looked at indigenous business organizations. So, talking about the indigenous digitalization, so digitization employed pragmatically has proven as a tool to reverse ethnocide. What does that mean? That um, we have seen that indigenous people have been on a back foot based on the historical injustice done to them, and while digitization has the potential to bring them towards, remove all those biases or the data colonization which has been done, and really bring their perspective forward. We have seen this through the use of, in the uses of GIS mapping as well as 3D scanning, which is particularly noteworthy and has helped indigenous population like the Maori population of New Zealand. Educators have also reported that digital literacy projects have helped students learn of technological skills, which actually instilled a sense of confidence in them. And this culturally responsive framework is exemplified by the emphasis on digital storytelling projects as well, digital literacy training, and art and music based language and literacy learning practices. That's how the differentiation has occurred with digitization or digitalization. We then actually looked at the literature for, on artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence has augmented the benefits conferred by digitalization, right? It is adding to it. It's adding more fire to it. What it is, machine learning algorithms can analyze vast amount of data from digital archives to recognize patterns in indigenous languages, for instance, right? Um, in aiding in their preservation and revitalization. It can AI can also predict a lot of things because it sees the patterns based on the data it is fed. It can also predict the languages or the cultures which are at the most risk of extinction, right, and aids in developing strategies for their preservation. Through predictive analytics, for instance, AI can contribute to better planning and decision making in areas such as resource allocation or infrastructure development and environmental management. Now, coming to generative AI. Generative AI is characterized by, and we all have heard about these terms now, application like deep learning and neural networks, which actually represents a significant leap in AI. And we all started hearing about generative AI, um, with a lot of us to, with the advent of ChatGPT. So while traditional AI systems analyze and learn from input data, generative AI, as we said, goes a step further by creating new data, right? Um, so deep learning, which is a subtype of machine learning, mimics the working of human brain in processing data for use in decision making. On the other hand, neural networks, the which are the main force behind deep learning, are algorithms designed to recognize patterns. They interpret sensory data and can learn to perceive the world by the unstructured data input they receive. The use of generative AI has the potential definitely to improve lives of indigenous people in various ways, be it economically, socially, or in education. There are areas where generative AI can definitely help indigenous population. Now, what are the research gaps we have identified? First and foremost, that there's a need for research focus on developing or refining the theoretical frameworks, methodologies, and philosophical approaches that can better guide the decision and development solution addressing societal challenges, especially those involving emerging technologies and their applications. Second is about impartiality of AI systems. As you mentioned, AI systems, they work on the data on which they are trained on to, and the data, if in itself contains biases and is colonized, the data which is going to be generated is going to be biased and colonized. So how do we remove those biases? And we can only remove those biases if we have inclusive decision making process, we have inclusive um, participation of indigenous, indigenous participation should be in there. So there's a need to investigate the dynamics of decision making processes, ensuring inclusivity and addressing power asymmetries. So these are the three main research gaps: exploring novel frameworks, assessing the impartiality of AI systems, and inclusive decision making processes. Now we have three major research questions. One is, how does the adoption of generative AI serve to empower indigenous communities, both economically and socially? Second is, what ethical considerations we need to take into account when implementing generative AI within these communities? And then how do we ensure participation of indigenous people while building new technological frameworks? Now, we what we have followed is an experimentation based approach utilizing application based on large language model. So we have a participatory design, generative AI integration, experimentation framework, user training and guidance, KPI monitoring, as well as continuous iteration. Talking about our research methodology, the way we want to do this is not through surveys but through effective experimentation, because surveys definitely serve as a great tool, but through effective experimentation we are not just gathering the data and trying to analyze it. It's a participatory approach where we are continuously monitoring, giving feedback, and taking decisions based on that over a period of time. Now, we are talking about three separate parts. One is transformative learning for indigenous education, connecting the indigenous communities socially, and third is economic empowerment for indigenous. Futures. If you would have seen the research questions we had, we are talking about these things. Now, how do we do that? We are working. We Our methodology involves, it's based on theories, and the five theories which we are talking about in here are the social capital theory, grounded theory, actor network theory, theory of rational choice, and capability theory. So we are not just formulating the question. So the way we are doing is through this application which will be administered or which will be used for participatory research with indigenous communities, when it will involve certain set of questions, and those questions will be based on these theories. Those questions will not be random. Based on those questions, we are actually relating our questions with these theories, and based on that we are capturing responses from the indigenous population. Um, so this, what we are seeing is a neural network, but careful data collection and pre-processing are the first steps in training a neural network, which we know, if anyone from the, who has seen these neural networks and how they work, the input layers, the hidden layers, and the output layers. And the most important thing is that by actively involving indigenous stakeholders and community leaders in the data collection process, which we are trying to do through the application, we ensure a fair representation. And that's how we remove the biases and we bring in the indigenous perspective into the data collection. Employing advanced techniques such as fairness constraints, adversarial training, and model interpretability, they will systematically analyze and mitigate biases in the neural network. As you mentioned, we are planning to use an Android based app which will have questions which will use effective experimentation. It will guide participants so that they can reach from state A, their current state, to state B, which is the desired stage. The approach will be to capture key performance indicators, the KPIs, based on participant responses over a period of 3 to 6 months. And we will implement continuous monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to assess the impact of the technology on indigenous data practices. And we'll need to regularly review and update the framework to incorporate feedback and lessons learned. So this is how um, we are going to come up with our application, which will definitely promote indigenous participation and try to remove the biases which exist in these systems. um, Thank you. I hope that that brings in some good insight for everyone and does some contribution. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask those. Thanks.